we're gonna move into the latter half of our conversation, which is, so what can we do about it, right? How can we better align? And I know our panelists have been kind of answering this as we've gone along, but more succinctly, I'm curious to hear everybody's thoughts on how we could align development team, process development team, manufacturing team, and really, how should a company take this approach to PAT adoption implementation? Where does it start? Is it upstream? Is it with process development? Is it with manufacturing? I'm just curious to hear people's thoughts. Tom, I don't want to single you out, but you are on my screen front and center, so why don't you lead us off here?
Yeah, sure. For me, when I was thinking about this question, I think, and I've heard this earlier in the discussion, I think it needs to start with a kind of a high level, corporate level buy-in on the initiative to be supported across the PD, MSAT, manufacturing organizations to have clear deliverables and value adds to implementation. So that's where I think it goes. I think we have the skills, the technology, the people to get it done, but I think we just need to have clear visibility to what success looks like for the enterprise, and not just necessarily for one of the functional areas.
Thank you, Tom. Anybody else?
Yeah, just to add on what Tom said, I think what I did say in the past, I think also an important factor for this PAT continuum, we need to select some PATs that are already mature, right? So if we start having a strategic deployment with potential PAT that are not really robust in terms of, method equivalencies for QC, digital infrastructure, AI, GMP, or data model and data Alcoa requirement from M&S. GMP probes should be autoclavable and so on. All of these PAT solutions must have been assessed in order to make sure that they have the right level of readiness for operation. And then from there, we can use this PAT continuum from R&D up to the end. Otherwise, we plan for failure. So this is an important factor as well.
Look, you mentioned digital architecture, and I heard you say that before. I'm curious what exactly comes to your mind when you think of digital architecture. For the folks in the audience, maybe wondering the same thing. Would you mind expounding a bit on what you mean there?
Yeah, so now PAT by itself is just a measurement, right? But the measurement is going somewhere. That's what we call the data flow, right? It must go somewhere into the different layer of the digital clouds, and then the MES or lead or actuator to manage the pump or the equipment. So there is a data flow that is embedded into the digital architecture, which is different from every company. So therefore, the data flow, the output of the measurement should be quite well managed in terms of the data flow structure with digital. And on top of that, obviously, we now have more and more what we call AI machine learners. And these AI machine learners are also part of this digital architecture and must be taken into consideration for the true commercial implementation. And this is quite heavy, right? Because then we bring digital, we bring automation, we bring the users, data scientists. So there are also plenty of functions that are normally not speak so well to each other, right? They have not the same type of capabilities and expertise. And this is also an important ingredient to make a path successful. And the cost of the implementation is also quite high, right?
Thank you, Luc. Yeah, I guess the question really boils down to what degree does cross-training help and getting CMC people to think like manufacturing people, and even, shoehorning another question in there, how do you guys think process development teams can support manufacturing teams during the initial tech transfer, as it relates to PATs?
Well, I would add a few comments here. the biggest barrier for the PAT implementation? We know the PAT technology will help for automatic continuous bioprocessing. How can we have a matured data analysis and model establishment then based on the model of prediction to control the process, go, no go, or continuous? I think that this is one of the barrier we need to think about. Yeah, so yeah, this is something I'm thinking, yeah.
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, from our company, I think this is also like one important part that we started to really do this cross training type of, at least to bring the experts from the manufacturing together with the process experts from development all together already at the beginning when we've phrased this problem statement. Because only in that way we can know actually what is the issue that because we need to think of the end goal already at the beginning, right? And that is actually quite helpful too, because the problem cannot be really even existing in development, but however, it could be a big issue in manufacturing, and then you only actually know when you have this kind of information. And the other part of it that I think is also very important is, like when you started to select what PAT tools you use for what, and I think Luke also mentioned that, if this probe is already autoclavable, like in a GMP, if the software and if the data infrastructure is already ready for this GMP implementation, this would be all need to be thought through at the beginning to make sure that the transfer is successful. And also the other part of it is that, from manufacturing, I think we have different environment, right? In development, we are facing a lot of with process variabilities. However, in manufacturing, it's more about the same process conditions. And especially when we talk about more sophisticated method like a Raman spectroscopy method, model development would be needed, right? And then it's actually very helpful when we do this kind of thing, and then also train manufacturing colleagues of how these models are built and what are important things. And because later on when we transfer this to them, the life cycle management would be on their shoulder, and it would be good for them to actually understand how those are built and what is important, what should be done. Although that I think eventually, they could be a joint effort. I think would be a shared responsibilities. But yeah, this kind of cross training and involve both and early on would be very critical.
Thank you,
maybe
Mengyao.
I'll just add a little bit, because at least at our stage of development and our size of our companies, we're building it as we're implementing it, and so we don't have some of the same like legacy systems that were talked about previously. Our PD and MSAT organizations are in one functional leadership group, and our manufacturing team are across the hall from our PD and MSAT folks. And PD and MSAT is on the manufacturing floor, enabling success of tech transfer and execution of GMP batches. So from a perspective of cross-training, we kind of need to, by necessity of our leanness, to be able to have people that go from development and kind of can go to the manufacturing floor. And although we're not doing a lot of PAT, it is helping enable successful tech transfer.
Thank you both. That was really helpful. Can we put the poll results on for our panelists here? So we have 53% of people said difficulty around implementation and validation is the biggest barrier to expanding process analytical technology use in their organization. How does that land with you guys? And more importantly, what would your advice be to those 53, almost half or a little over the majority of the audience here? What would your advice be around implementation and validation specifically?
Yeah, I would chime in for this. From beginning, I mentioned about the pH probe. Although that's a traditional matured equipment, but when we implement that matured equipment, we still encounter a number of challenges based on from the quality control, SOP, documentations, spec setting, so those we just use that simple case study. Then we apply to the new technology down to the road. We can anticipate tremendous of the challenges from PD to manufacturing. So we need to consider equipment, facility fit, quality, and documentations, validations. So there are many things you need to think as a whole. But today's topic is very, very helpful for industry, for us to implement PAT for future process development and manufacturing. So thank you, Taylor, for this topic.
Of course. Thank you, Richard. Does anybody else want to weigh in on implementation and validation as the biggest challenge our audience is facing right now?
We are actually also part of this 53%.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
Yes, but I mean, but we are trying to learn it, right, as well. And I think right now we are coming to agreement that what we think would be important and helpful to move forward towards that stage would be to really have a staged, gated approach and not doing everything at a time. Like starting with some low-hanging fruits and maybe not starting with this more sophisticated model-based spectroscopy method, but like a more simple ones like UV-based method, and started to really have that as a role model and have it also a staged way, meaning that we started from a proof of concept, then we enter into piloting phase, and only after that with also go, no-go decision each stage, we can move forward maybe more easily with it. And also like when we really start to use it, right, we do not directly use it for control, but we would first use it for starting with monitoring, right? And with a certain transition period, have both offline and online method always available. And once we gain the confidence that this online method also is working well, then only by then we say, okay, now we move to the control stage. And now we are trying to move at least one project towards that direction. And this is the approach that we're trying to follow. And hopefully with this, then we can move forward faster with our PAT implementation.
Thank you, Mengyao. You mentioned these two concepts that I wanted to touch on. You mentioned low-hanging fruit and also just evaluating the success of the implementation. I'm curious what you think the best near-term opportunities are for implementation for companies out there, and also to add on that, what should these companies' metrics be for successful implementation? Like, how do you evaluate the success of a PAT?
I mean, from our perspective, right, the first is, starting with what we think would be the near term, like as mentioned, right, we would like to start with those low-hanging fruit. For example, for upstream, we talk about capacitance, for example, right, and, it's like linear regression instead of building a multivariate model. So we think that should ease the way that we implement. And like with the matrix, first there's like a different levels of matrix we can talk about. First is the scientific or technical one, right? And that is how good your model is, your model accuracy, how good your online monitoring compares with the offline classical analytics, right? And this is definitely one of the biggest matrix that we need to think about. And then later on, we also have the operational wise, right? How, what is the downtime, or hopefully there's no downtime of such a device. And there's also no need for expert intervention or whatever. It's just be there and robust and it runs. And then third level would be more on the business level. Once this is implemented, do we actually see a benefit? Are we really reducing analytical effort? Are we reducing the sampling time? Are we enhancing the cycle time, for example? This would be also a matrix that could be evaluated.
Thank you, Mengyao. I did want to answer this question I saw come in from Altaf in the audience. Altaf asks, which critical quality attributes in manufacturing or analytical QC testing are being measured by PATs? And perhaps that kind of weaves into your answer, Mengyao, of lowest hanging fruit. Tom, I saw you nodding your head. Do you have a response for Altaf?
Right now, it's just the basics like pH, cell viability, cell count, but those aren't unreleased. They're just for process monitoring. But it is a great question, and I'm interested to hear what my panelists respond with.
Anybody want to weigh in?
Yeah, I can list some of these, PAT application by process step, right? So if still high level, but so we have all the preparation, right? Raw material, buffers, media, and the idea is to use simple sensors like pH, conductivity, in order to remove all of this this mixing time, discussion, and so on. There are also Raman and FTIR are good PAT for more complex type of media. When you have media with non-characteristic built-in, like animal origin and so on. Then you have the making, so the bioreactor or the synthesis in chemistry, stems, simple sensor, but then we would go quicker to Raman, gas analyzer for bacterial fermentation, infrared as well. Then in purification, as we discussed, mainly UV and infrared. Formulation, we have some use cases in particle size analyzers, but it's more for monitoring, right? So it's not the full scope of the PAT emission, but the particle size analyzer and UV infrared are also part of the formulation. And our big hope, as I was saying, in filling, would be to have a PAT, a robust PAT to remove bioburden, sterility assurance, sterility testing, and LAL.
Thank you, Luc. I think we did have time for one more question. Right under the wire, I saw one come in from Michael, who's a CEO. Michael's asking, a CEO of a CDMO. Michael asks, in plant design and startup phase, question to the panelist is, from a big biopharma perspective, would big biopharma want to see a CDMO implement PATs from the get-go design phase so as to attract biomanufacturing contracts? Or where would PATs land in the CDMO selection criteria list? I think that's a great question, Michael. I'm curious to hear from our panelists here. Whoever wants to start.
So definitely, I can say that, right? Definitely, if the CDMO has more maturity and experience in the PAT domain than the customer, the big pharma customers, I would really support this change of tech transfer, right, from internal to the CDMO. So definitely, the more the CDMO is an expert, has demonstrated the value and has already some experience in submission file, the more this CDMO can be on top of the selection criteria whenever there is a tech transfer discussion. And I know that some CDMO are much more mature than us, right? Because they have to adapt to different customer requirements. They need to adapt their process, but need also to optimize their process steps. So some CDMO are much more mature than us, than the big pharma.
Thank you, Luc. Anybody else want to weigh in there on Michael's question on where PATs kind of fall, or PAT use falls in the CDMO criteria? Would it sway you one way or the other?
I would say yes, right? If like big pharma companies are all developing in that direction, then in the end they would have the process which requires even such a PAT tool. And I would say for CDMOs, then if they wouldn't actually have that technology in their capability or in their tool list, right, in their toolbox, then it's then very hard for a pharma company, I mean big pharmas, to transfer the project to them. So it's good to know, you know, what the in general industrial trends are heading.
Yeah. No, I agree. That makes sense. I mean, if the gold standard processes all use PATs, then it stands to reason that CDMOs need to reflect that and have that functionality. I'd love to keep going, but unfortunately we are at the end of the hour. So I'd like to thank our panelists again so much for being here. Thank you to our audience members who tuned in, and thank you to Greenfield Global for sponsoring today's event. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much.